Okay, so since our forum presenters are here, let me take the chance to welcome everyone. This is the Early Career Forum. My name is Brian Battelle. I'm an assistant professor in the Physics and Astronomy department here at the University of Pittsburgh. This is always one of the most fun and informative sessions at PHENO, and this year we're really happy to welcome Julia Gonski, Sarah Simon, and Midhat Farooq, who will lead this year's Career Forum. Let me just say a little bit about them. Julia works in the area of experimental high energy physics. She obtained her PhD from Harvard and is currently a postdoctoral research at Columbia University, working on the ATLAS experiment. Sarah works in the area of observational cosmology. She received her PhD from Princeton, then went on to the University of Michigan as a postdoc, and now she's a Wilson Fellow at Fermilab. Midhat earned her PhD at the University of Michigan doing research on the muon G-2 experiment. And she is currently the careers program manager at the American Physical Society. And she also led last year's Career Forum, and so we're really happy to have her back. So they'll all give you some perspective, advice, and resources for early career physicists, considering a variety of possible career paths. I think there's first going to be a presentation by Sarah and Julia, roughly about 30 minutes long. And then there's going to be time for questions from all of you. So I'd like to ask that you reserve your questions until the presentation is completed, but please take note of them. Also, you can send your questions if you prefer not to speak up, or you prefer to sort of be semi-anonymous, you can just send your questions directly to me using the Zoom chat, and I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf. Okay, so without further delay, let me welcome Sarah, Julia, and Midhat. Thanks a lot for being here.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to start us off. So I'll share my screen here. All right, so I'll be covering the academic career paths, and then Julia will be talking more about career paths outside of academia. So my talk will be kind of focused on the academic career paths, which I just went through the whole process. So hopefully I can give you some good insights of what I've learned along the way. So just to remind everyone, we are following the PHENO 2021 Code of Conduct. So please make sure that you're following that throughout the session. And so just as a quick overview, the most common path to academic positions usually go to graduate school, then you do a postdoc appointment. Some people do multiple postdoc appointments, and then you apply for a faculty or national lab position. We really wanted to highlight that this is not the only academic path, and that it's also not the only career path. So Julia will talk a little bit more about alternative career paths. But for the purposes of this talk, this is the most common path, so this is kind of what I'll be focusing on for academic physicians. So faculty jobs in and of themselves can cover actually a really wide range of institutions that have different aims and criteria. So there's these R1 research institutions, which have a lot of research activity. And so you can imagine that research would be heavily weighted in those applications. And then there's jobs like liberal arts colleges that would focus more on undergraduate education, and some may not even have graduate programs. So in these ones, teaching is more heavily weighted. And some actually don't require a postdoc. And so when we talk about these, we kind of talk very broadly, but there are very different aims for different places. So I want to start out by just saying the kind of elephant in the room, which is the academic track is highly competitive. So there's about 1,600 PhDs per year. About half of those go into postdocs with the intention to continue on in faculty. And as you can see in this kind of 2017, 2018 data, there are about 556 faculty positions of all types that year. And only about 259 of those were the tenure track or tenured positions. And so not everyone who goes into the postdoc with the intention of continuing to faculty will. But if that is the path that you want to follow, there's a lot of things you can do to set yourself up for success right now. The first is to consider all your choices, really think about what you're good at doing and what you enjoy doing. One technique you can do is to use a career journal to kind of track what you like or don't like about your job at the moment. And then you can record also both your technical and non-technical skills and consider what you really value in a potential career. And if you know which path you want to take, you can start working now on projects that'll build the skills that you need for that path. For example, academic jobs are a balance of research, teaching, and service. And so you really want to have a little bit of experience in each of those, and how much you weight those will depend on what type of job you want, right? And so you want to start also building your network now. You can do that through academic conferences, through your collaborations and people that you know, and also through LinkedIn as well. So for the postdoctoral side, they're usually 2 to 3 years each, but they can be longer or shorter. And several people do multiple postdocs. And there's kind of two main types of postdoc appointments. There's fellowships, which are usually funded by an institution or department. Those have a little bit more freedom in the research because you're being funded externally. And usually the committee who's selecting who gets these fellowships is made up of members from across the institution. And so with these applications, it's really important to it can help to have cross-cutting research or be planning to work with multiple groups so that you can get some good overlap there. And with these, it's really important to sell your science and make it understandable to a broad audience. If the other type of postdoc is if you're just hired by a research group, and usually for that, you're just doing research for that group. So usually the committee is either just the professor or scientist that's hiring, or they'll have a committee of professors or scientists, usually in your research area. And so what they really want for these is for you to work for them on their projects. So there's a little less freedom, but that really depends on who you're applying to work with and what types of projects you want to work with. And for these, you don't need as much background in the statements because everyone who's reading it is familiar with your work. And so you can kind of be a little bit more technical with these ones. The most important thing about postdocs and really any position is that it's really critical to talk to people before you apply. So you want to find out what projects they're most excited to have people work on. That lets you know if it's a good fit. You can also kind of feel out how often you'll be allowed to present at conferences and other professional development things that'll be available to you. And you can kind of ask yourself, okay, with these types of projects, would I be able to take leading roles and do research that's going to put me further toward the career goals that I want to have? And it also means that you can tailor your application to focus on those types of projects. You can also find out what the department dynamics are like for fellowship applications. There can be a lot of politics going on in the background that you don't know about, but that can be really helpful to understand. You can also, if you're talking to people, they'll know to actually look for your application or tell the committee to look for it. So they'll say, oh, that's a name we recognize. We're supposed to be looking out for that application, which can also help as well. There's a lot of ways that you can introduce yourself to people. You can do introductions via mutual contacts, but also cold emails or introductions are also okay. Usually when you introduce yourself at conferences or in emails, you tell them that you'll be on the job market in the fall. Spring and summer are a great time for this before you're applying the next fall. And so you'll want to introduce yourself, for example, who you work for, what you work on, what institution you're at, very briefly, and just say you'd like to set up a time to discuss potential postdoc positions. And then you can set up a time, have a call, and kind of start talking about some of the projects you might do. So postdoc applications usually consist of a cover letter that's about 1 page. This is usually pretty underutilized in the application, but really what you want to say is what position you're applying to, your current position, and how your research and experiences are a good fit for the institution. And one thing that it can be really nice to do here is to include wording from the actual job posting to show that you're fitting their criteria. Next, you'll usually have a CV and publications list. These can be longer, so you really want to make sure that the most important information is early and that the formatting makes it really easy to follow, because people are going to be looking at hundreds of these applications. And if it's hard to find the information, they're probably not going to find it. Another thing to keep in mind on CVs is that your job title alone or like titles within your collaboration don't necessarily tell people what you do. So it's always good to include bullet points of major accomplishments or responsibilities that you have in the positions that you hold. You also, one thing I like to do is highlight papers that you played a leading role on or were first author on. And so what you can do for that is have kind of a separate section in your publications that has a section for significant contributions. Typically, you also need about 3 to 5 letters of recommendation. So you want, for these, you want people who are really familiar with your contributions and can frame their importance to other people in the field. And I think it's really important to actually ask someone if they think they can write you a good letter. Because if they're honest and say no, then you don't want that person to be writing your letter. Typically, for letter writers, more information you give them, the better letter you're going to get out. So you want to send information on deadlines, what your research plans for each one are, your CV, and anything you want them to highlight in their letter for you. You can also, you'll also have to do a research statement, which is usually about 3 pages. Here you want to describe your science, why it's important, and what you plan to work on. And you really want to include how you'd be a good fit for the specific institution. And this is the part that's often missing from postdoc applications. People take the same research statement and send it to everyone. But you want to include why you're a really good fit. For example, are you using their infrastructure to enable your research, or are there specific groups there that you could work with? You want to include that in your research statement. For diversity statements, these are relatively new, so not all applications require them yet, but they're typically 1 to 2 pages, and they really want to know what experiences you have in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and how your experiences have shaped your views and goals. They also want to know how you might contribute to a more diverse and inclusive environment, for example, in the lab or in the department overall, and how you might tie into or expand existing efforts. I think one of the key things about applications is that committees are reading many, many, many applications. So you want to make the important information obvious and be concise. So things like bolding, italics, section titles, and repeating structure can be really helpful for making sure that the information is clear and readily available for people who are reading through your application. So as far as postdoc pay, this is a graph here showing general pay. So you can see that generally government labs pay a little bit more than universities, and that the pay here is usually less than you would make in the private sector. Now, pay can usually be negotiated, so you should always try. The worst they can say is no. But don't forget to negotiate other benefits too. You can negotiate for vacation time, resources for conference and travel. You can negotiate moving expenses or career services for significant others. So there's a lot of other things that you can be negotiating when you go to negotiate for a job. Moving on to faculty applications, one of the most important things here is to have people from both within and outside your field give you feedback on your application. People within your field might think, oh, of course this is important, but if someone outside of your field doesn't get that impression from your application, then you're gonna have a very tough time. So you wanna get a variety of feedback for these. These applications have a cover letter, CV and publications list. You have your letters of recommendation, a research statement. There's also a teaching statement, and often a diversity statement as well. And I think the main differences really come in the research and teaching statements. So for faculty research statements, you really want to highlight why your research is important. It's good to have kind of a 10-year plan with potential for a steady stream of publications. So you want some near-term projects that are a slam dunk that will have immediate results, some midterm projects that'll have results in a couple of years, and then some more ambitious long-term projects. And you also want to highlight how you're a leader in the field. Another thing that you want to do is include what resources you need and how you plan to get them. For example, you could say, oh, I'm going to apply to this grant to cover this part of my project. And this will really give them an idea of the scale of the startup funds you'll need when you're working through that. so they can see if that's a match too. You can also include how your research fits in and broadens the research program at the specific institution. And committees, when they're hiring someone, are picking a colleague that'll probably be around for something like 30 years. So they want to be excited about your research and excited about what you're going to bring to the table. So that's what you kind of have to keep in your mind when you're applying for these. For the teaching statement, it should really focus on what types of classes you're interested in teaching. For example, oh, I only want to teach upper level, or are you willing to help with the larger intro classes? You want to include what your approaches to teaching are, both for kind of undergrads and grad students. And another really cool thing that you can do is talk about how you'll bring your research into the classroom. And so it's important to kind of think about what you would say for these teaching statements as well. So one of the most important things is that every application needs to be tuned to the institution. So you want to talk to several people at the institutions you want to apply to. That helps you understand the culture, the department goals, and what they're looking for in the search, so you can highlight the aspects of you and your work that fit into their plans. For example, a search may say it's for general physics, but they really want a solid state person because they want to build a stronger program there. So that's going to be a harder one to compete with if you're in high energy physics, and may not be worth as much time sinking into an application. You can also, and another example is that, oh, they really want to find someone not only who will do cutting edge research, but who also help them revamp their curriculum. So in that application, highlighting your teaching skills would be really important. And you also want to research the institution on your own as well and tune that accordingly. For example, is there a new computing center that your research would benefit from using? They really want you to use the infrastructure that they're building because they're really excited about that. Or for example, if they want to be on the cutting edge for physics education, in your teaching statement, you should have a lot that's on the cutting edge rather than the classic format for a class. Another thing that you want to do is think about what you want to accomplish and include what resources you need to do the work in your research. For example, if the graduate program only has 10 students a year, you shouldn't have a research plan that requires 10 grad students working in your lab to do all the work, because there's just not enough grad students at the institution for that. So you have to think about the scale of what you're saying in your research statement and what resources you need and match that to the institution as well. For national labs, it's very similar to faculty applications, but the research statement's tuned a little differently. Usually you have your cover letter, your CV, letters of rec, and a research statement. And one thing to keep in mind is that postdocs are more available than graduate students at national labs. So if you're talking about what labor resources you need, you probably want to mention more postdocs than graduate students. The DOE, if it's a DOE lab, is more mission oriented. So you'll really want to consider what DOE projects the lab is working on and areas that they want to build up. So for this, it's really good to reach out to people at the labs you're applying to get a feel for this, and also to learn about the lab culture in general. So if all of the applications go well, you'll usually have an interview. Sometimes there's a phone or Zoom pre-interview to make the shortlist, but oftentimes you can just be shortlisted. But typically what they do is they fly you out for a day or two, and you'll give a colloquium. And this is really one of the most important parts of that visit, because it's going to be critical to assess, is your research interesting? Do you have big plans for your research, and how you communicate your research to others, which can give them a good feel for how you'll be teaching. For the interview meetings, you'll talk about your research and teaching mostly. So there's one-on-one meetings for 1 to 2 days with other faculty or scientists, just talking about research and whatever topic they really decide to bring up. You can have meetings with the chair or deans, and often these will ask about what startup resources you need, especially if you're faculty. There's meetings with the whole hiring committee, meetings with student groups. And then for national labs, they often also ask behavioral questions too. So not just research, teaching, service, but also kind of questions along the lines of, you know, what is a big challenge and how did you overcome it? To try and get a feel for if you'll fit in with their culture. And so it's really kind of an intensive 1 to 2 day process. So you'll kind of be going all day for those 2 days. But one thing that can really help you prepare for this is to think about answers you might give to common questions. So you have those at the ready, and then come prepared with questions you have as well, because they'll always ask you, do you have questions for us? And you want to show your interest by asking those questions. So I think that the main kind of takeaways here are to start building your network and take on projects and opportunities that are going to bring you closer to the career you want. You want to start identifying people now who could be good potential letter writers and further build those relationships so they'll really be familiar with you and your work when you go to get that letter of recommendation. Good applications and interviews are really tuned to the specific institution. So do your research, talk to people, look up their programs online, really, really do an in-depth dive into the institution that you're applying to. You want to make sure that that institution and the career path is a good fit for you. And if you get an offer, really make sure to negotiate. There's a lot more to negotiate than just salary, so don't forget about those aspects too. And I think this has been a real information dump, and there's a lot here, so it can seem overwhelming. But I think one of the most important things to remember is that you're not alone in this. You can find mentors that are willing to help and guide you. And different mentors can play different roles. Some can be more cheerleaders to give you that emotional support to get through this, or you know, some may be better at technical advice. Someone who specializes in teaching could help you with your teaching statement. And so really be looking for those mentors and start finding them early, because those are the people who are really going to help you through. And so that's the end for me. So I will pass off to Julia to talk about non-academic careers.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, so I was just thinking, I guess it makes more sense to just save all the questions for the end. I guess ordinarily if someone finishes a talk and we'd say, oh, I have questions, but yeah, I think we can just kind of categorize them all in this big discussion section. So yeah, so thanks very much, Sarah. Hi, everybody. My name is Julia Gonski, and thanks also to Brian for the introduction. So yeah, so as Sarah mentioned, we wanted to kind of upfront go through the academic career path, which may be for better or for worse in the current culture of physics is sort of like the nominal option. But we also thought it was worth dedicating some specific amount of attention to non-academic career options. And I think I would just say sort of upfront, if there's any takeaway from this set of slides, it's to normalize the fact that many people do not go into academia. The fact that all of you are here at PHENO means that you've probably decided to take on some element of physics research in whatever level of study you happen to be in. I do not think that locks you into the idea of doing research for the rest of your career. And so I'm going to try to, in this set of slides, which I think will be a bit shorter than Sarah's, but to at least just sort of go through some of the statistics related to what people with degrees in physics do, both at the PhD level and at the bachelor's level, what you can kind of expect in terms of jobs outside of academia, and then go through a couple of resources about how to make that transition from the academic setting if that's what you decide to do. I would be remiss if I didn't give a huge thanks to Midhat and also Crystal Bailey over at APS, who are really the masters of material when it comes to kind of telling this story. And so I've had a lot of the material that I'm going to show is really inspired from a lot of their hard work. So thanks very much to them and APS for those in advance. So I'll start with just the sort of breakdown. Again, if I said that, you know, the idea of sort of normalizing what people do in physics that's outside of academia, starting with a very broad question: what does somebody with a physics PhD do at the end of the day after they get their degree? And so this table you're looking at here is a couple different sectors of employment, and then the type of employment that you get after you receive your final degree, and that being the PhD in this particular case. And I've put a box around the potentially permanent category here, since of course a lot of people that are staying in academia will end up in some sort of postdoc position that will have a time limit on it. And the stat that I would show here, that just sort of if you take the max of that column, is that about 70% of potentially permanent jobs after the PhD are in the private sector. So this is just 1 year after your PhD. But I think it gives a bit of a sense of if you're looking for something that will not just be another couple of years of a position after graduation. Most of those sorts of opportunities will be happening in the private sector. And so if we zoom a little bit further out, so that was just 1 year after your PhD. Now, if we go to about 10 to 15 years after the PhD to see a bit of a broader scale of how things look, the fraction basically goes to about a majority still that are working in the private sector. So again, there's different columns here for the different sectors of positions that you can have after you get your final degree, and then broken down into different rows based on within 15 years or past 15 years after receiving your degree. And you can see here that in both of those categories, that the plurality of people end up working in some kind of business sector, and actually quite significantly, specifically for for-profit companies. So something in the industry that is producing a product that requires some sort of physics-based knowledge. And if I go to page 4 here, something that I think is also really worth noting about those industry jobs, I think for many of us that started doing research and enjoy that, the idea of leaving academia seems maybe a bit strange, since you really did get attached to the sort of research environment and asking fundamental questions and that sort of thing. And most of the people in these quote unquote industry jobs are still performing research, in fact. And so here I've put a box around all of the different things that would fall under that category of industry positions. So anything non-academic, the academia positions that Sarah talked about are on the bottom here. And then not only what % of physics PhDs in the private sector are performing research in those positions, but I really like this extra question that's added to this table, has equal say in the research performed. So sort of disabusing us of the notion that if you go into the industry, you just have to kind of work for someone above you and do exactly what you're told, that there are really novel questions that are being asked in any one of these private sector sorts of companies, and that you, as a PhD, would still have the ability to be the person that's asking those questions and finding the answers to them based on sort of your own line of reasoning, not necessarily just being a cog in a wheel, as it were. And so that's the kind of the story for physics PhDs, but then also for a physics bachelor, since I think that the idea of normalizing non-academic career trajectories would also mean that plenty of people decide that after 4 years of college, they're good. They don't feel necessarily compelled to continue. And there are still a lot of options for people with just a bachelor's as a terminal degree as well. And so again, this is sort of just breaking down 1 year after receiving a physics bachelor's, about half go straight into the workforce. So that means that less than half actually even go on to grad school. So again, just kind of opening up the notion of what most people are doing with these degrees. And then of that half that go straight into the workforce that don't continue into graduate school, 32 of those are going into the private sector. So you don't necessarily even have to get a PhD as well to start to get the benefits of having that physics degree as it pertains to value or capability on the job market. And then if we go sort of breaking down for new physics bachelors that are employed in the private sector, where are those jobs actually happening? And so you see a majority of these are in some sort of engineering related industrial track or computer information systems. I think this breakdown is probably rapidly developing as positions in data science are becoming more and more frequently desired in industrial positions. And so again, I think this was the same stat from the previous slide, that 2/3 of physics bachelors enter the workforce, that do enter the workforce find jobs in the private sector, and that the majority are still working in STEM related jobs. So using those skills that you earn even at the undergraduate level and using that to the advantage, to your advantage somewhere else outside of academia. And so then, of course, to kind of put all this in perspective as it comes to salary. So Sarah flashed sort of the salaries that you might have access to at the academia level. And this is the same plot broken down by different degree holders. So physics PhDs, masters, and then bachelors broken down by whether or not you end up in a position that relies on STEM knowledge specifically. And so these are, so I mean, of course, generally tends to scale with the amount of knowledge that you have. But this is even clearing the 6-figure number for people leaving academia after the PhD level to go into industry. And just to kind of look at this as a function of time, that this is going back to maybe the early 90s here, that the percentage of physics PhDs employed in the private sector is sitting right around that 50% number for quite a few decades. So I think this is a way to see that the industry has been the largest employment base for physics PhDs for over decades. and that it is quite consistent, that there are not, significant fluctuations where on the order of finishing your degree in 4 years, you may have to really readapt your plans because the industry demand has plummeted or something like that. This is really a reliable requirement that companies have for people with physics degree-based skills. And sort of along the same line of the stability of that sort of demand, or how reliable this is, if you're looking to make sort of a 10-year plan at maybe the undergraduate or graduate level, taking a look at how everything has changed in the past year and the impact of COVID on that job market, since this may be a little startling to people who are still in school and maybe thinking that staying in school for longer or staying in academia may provide a little bit of insulation against some of the madness that is happening in the economy in the past year. And in fact, if you look at the amount of demand for permanent position recruits for a couple different industries going from 2019 to 2020, in fact, industry has seen an increased proportion of permanent position recruits. Government, national labs, and academia have also seen an increased proportion of temporary position recruits. The number of four-year college recruitment has fallen in 2020, but I think that the picture is still sort of clear that even in a scenario where there's lots of fluctuations in the job market, that there is still a strong demand for physics-based skills at either degree level, PhD or bachelor's. And so this is just a quick overview of how to start preparing for this, what some resources may be available to you if you're thinking about making this transition and want to kind of broaden your network a little bit to all of these industry-related fields. So of course, building your network is kind of the core of any job career-based discussion. So LinkedIn, I think, is not so commonly used in academia, but it is a very common kind of place of discourse for recruiters and companies outside of academia. So that's something that's good to have kind of fleshed out and updated if you're thinking about changing into an industry position. Alumni mixers at your institution, career fairs, conferences, all of these can have representation from people outside of academia that you can, I mean, as Sarah suggested, I love the cold call. I use the cold call all the time. So I think that that's always a good way to just introduce yourself to people and see where people are at. In addition to volunteering or job shadowing, internships, all these sorts of things that can give you a flavor for a company or a different field. The APS, the American Physical Society, also has a lot of new programs really specifically dedicated to supporting physicists in industry. So the APS has this impact program, industry mentoring for physicists, to find a mentor in industry. You can also get in touch with faculty members in your department to connect you to industry professionals. If the numbers in the past couple slides sort of indicate just how much many students will end up going on into industry, probably they stay in touch with their advisors, and maybe there's a connection there that you can take advantage of. In addition, you can attend informational interviews. So you can sort of request to have a particular chat. Once you kind of find these people in this network that you're interested in, you can follow up in this way, where you can ask specifically the questions about what that job is like, what the field is like, their typical workday, aspects of the work that they like or dislike, how similar it is to academia, and so on. And I guess the only caveat here would be not to specifically ask for a job, but really just to kind of get your face and your name and your skill set kind of out in certain circles, because those things really do propagate fairly quickly. So that brings me to my conclusions here. And again, like I said up front, I think that it's really important to make the point that if you enjoy physics and you enjoy research, academia is not the only option. Over half of both physics bachelor's and PhD earners end up in the private sector. I didn't really get so much into what different private sector options are available, but there's a really wide range of non-academic things: private research companies, finance, federal government positions, policy positions. I know, Midhat herself has ended up in this sort of position, so I think that we can definitely hear from her on moving to the nonprofit world, and that regardless of any of those, whatever one of these varied positions you end up in, that physics skills are a valuable and monetizable asset. And that there are a lot of resources available to help make the transition. I think many of Sarah's comments also apply here, just sort of reaching out to people, building that network, finding what type of mentorship works for you, and that you can leave at any point. So just because you do a postdoc does not mean that you are tied to applying for a faculty position, and that whatever skills you kind of earn in that research environment can still be helpful to you in the end. And so I will land on page 12 here, which is a bunch of links of various resources. Some of these I mentioned in the course of this set of slides, and maybe I'd find a way to put this PDF on Dropbox and drop a link in the chat or something so that people have access to this. But yeah, like I said, I think in recent years, there's become a real push for this sort of understanding that a lot of people are going to leave the field. And so there are more resources than ever. And I think we'd be more than happy to connect you to any others or whatever else we can. So great, thanks. I guess from here we will move to the Q&A. Brian, were you about to jump in there?
Yeah, thanks very much, Julia and Sarah, for these excellent presentations. Yeah, so now we move to the question and answer period. So as I put in the chat, you're very welcome just to ask questions directly to Julia, Sarah, and Midhat. You could raise your hand. Otherwise, you can just post your questions in the chat, and I can answer them. And as well, if you don't want everyone to see the question, you could just send it directly, privately to me, and I'll ask it sort of anonymously. So please go ahead. And I've already received a few questions, so let me maybe start with those. So the first question is, how difficult advisable is it to try to return to get a postdoc with the goal of a tenure track position if one does a stint in the private sector or another academic field outside of physics after getting their PhD?
I think it's useful to think about how you could frame it, right? What skills you have learned in that other work that you can bring and be a better researcher with. And so I think if you can frame it that way, then I don't think there should be an issue.
Yeah, I will say that I have heard of this happening. So there are people that do this. I'm not sure if it's super common, but it's definitely possible. I will also say though, just bear in mind that, you know, a postdoc is a temporary position. It often has a much lower salary than an industry job. So just think about how you want to lay out your career path and whether that is something that could possibly delay you reaching to a non-temporary position.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, here's another question. I'm interested in any advice for someone who is looking for a postdoc in a field outside of their subfield. For example, someone who wants to go from neutrino to collider physics. Does this change if you have experience, either in undergraduate or earlier in your PhD career with that subfield?
Yeah, I think people switch commonly between fields in postdocs. I've seen a couple of people do it. A lot of people from other high energy have come into cosmology, so we have a lot of people like that in our field. And I think it's really the skills that you're building as a PhD in whatever field you're a PhD in are also applicable as in a postdoc. And so really it's just highlighting what skills you have and how those can help the research that's important.
Okay. Okay, here's another question. You mentioned that most of the private sector careers are in for-profit organizations. Can you give some examples of private sector nonprofit organizations? I guess this was either to Julia or Midhat.
Yeah, I would send it right to Midhat. I'm sure you have better.
Well, the very first example that comes to mind is APS because I worked there. It is technically a nonprofit, but there are, I don't know if I have specific companies that I can talk about, but there are definitely one of the biggest growing sectors right now are data science. Data science is booming right now, and I think it's very applicable for particle physicists. And there are companies, some contract with government, but some are non-for-profit that do data science for social good. And things like that. So those are some that come to mind. I'll have to think more. Maybe I'll come up with more examples in a little bit.
I also see a question in the chat about references for an industry position application, asking if it's okay to have the same professors do all of them, or if you should have some more variety. And I think it really depends on the position. So you want to kind of tune your letter writers to the position. If the position is really talking about your technical skills, maybe it doesn't help to have the person who more knows your analysis skills, right? So you really want to make sure that whatever letter writers you have can speak to the skills specifically for that position. And if they happen to all be the same people, that's fine. And if you have different ones that could speak better to something for a specific application, you might want to mix them up.
I would also add that, in industry, so maybe your professor, one of the professors you have is someone who's really well known in the field. That might not be the case in industry, right? They might not know who it is that's writing your letter. So pick someone who does know you well and someone who will, I think Sarah already said this, but someone who will give you a good reference. Let them know. Sometimes for industry jobs, it's not a letter that's required, but they're ask you for 3 references and they'll follow up with them if they're interested in your application. So let them know that they might get a call from so-and-so. And what I like to do is I would send them the job posting, so they know what job it is that you're applying to, as well as the resume and cover letter you submitted, so that if they, and then just let them know, here are the 3 things I sort of want you to highlight. So if you have 3 references that they asked for, and you've worked with all 3 of these people in different capacities, maybe you can say, hey, can you talk more about my programming skills? Hey, I worked with you on research, but I also helped organize this collaboration meeting. So can you please talk about my organization skills? And just try to target everything in the job posting, or all the top few things in the job posting, through those different references.
Okay, thanks very much. So here's a very, I think, difficult but important question. How do I know if I should stay in academia if I'm struggling to get through grad school? And related to that, how do people with physical disabilities or mental illnesses usually manage in grad school?
Well, I think, part of it is understanding what you value in a position and what skills and things you want to build. I personally have mental illness, and I, did struggle in grad school, but then I made a real commitment to find the support and help that I needed through counseling. And so that's something that I do regularly, and make sure that I keep on top of my mental health too. And I have to, set different boundaries than other people might have to, as far as work-life balance. But I find that almost I'm more productive than some people who are overworking themselves all of the time, because I'm taking the time to take care of myself. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I would highlight all of that. I think that I would even take that maybe to one kind of further level and say that once you get up to the PhD, postdoc, faculty application stage, there is no template for how to get through any stage. There's no template for how to succeed at any stage. I think there's no single type of intelligence that makes you a good scientist. And I find that in almost I remember joking with friends of mine in my grad school cohort that there's this sort of hilarious lack of correlation between the skills that you need to go from level to level. Like, you, as a graduate student, you're praised to be really good at taking classes and taking exams. And then you go to a postdoc level, and all of a sudden you have to be a good project manager and mentor and manage a team and do a lot of coding. And that wasn't a thing you really had to practice. And then you get to the faculty level and you have to write grants and teach. And that wasn't a thing you practiced in the previous stage. So I think that I give that sort of anecdote to say, of course, there are common threads in that you're doing research the whole time. And so you can build on those skills to your advantage. But if you are struggling with certain aspects of one career stage, I do not think it disqualifies you from imagining that you'll be really successful at the next career stage, because there are such, different skills will kind of come in and out of focus as you are going through, even in one position, through different stages of projects. So I would not be discouraged if there are some aspects of graduate school that feel like a struggle. There are some aspects of graduate school that feel like a struggle, period, right? Like, I think that's just a uniform experience. So I think that it goes back to Sarah's comment that you kind of think about, okay, well, like, what about this is not working? Is it my group, in which case you change institutions and that problem goes away? Is it this particular element of the research that I'm stuck on, in which case maybe that can be a bit more of like a foundational challenge. So I think it requires a bit of critical thinking, but it should not be, there's no blanket statement like, oh, criteria X, Y, and Z are satisfied, therefore you shouldn't stay. I think it's such a personal decision. And there are ways to work around basically every roadblock that could come up, I think.
Well, and your experiences at different institutions can be drastically different too.
Yeah.
The culture of an institution can make a huge difference. The person you're working with at that institution can make a huge difference. So if you're having a bad postdoc, you might have a good postdoc with another person at a different institution. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you hate all postdocs if you're struggling with one.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of Sarah and Julia. I would say, yeah, this not just the culture in different universities, but culture in different lab groups, right? So I actually switched groups twice. And it was the second time I did it, I almost dropped out of grad school because it was just extremely difficult to be in the group I was in. And I started feeling like I was doing something wrong, and I switched groups, and suddenly I was productive, I was doing really great work, and I was successful. So yeah, think about where you are, look at your environment, and think about what you need. So make a list of things that you enjoy, make a list of things that you don't enjoy, and look at how much of each of those you're having to do in your group every day. Talk to students in other groups. And if you really feel like you can't find the right fit, you don't have to stay in grad school. Like, I'm not going to tell you to drop out, but I'm just, think about what it is that you need to be happy. And yeah, look at counseling services on your campus, and look at, I'm sure there's like for a physical disability, like you're protected by law in many cases, and there should be someone on campus who can help you figure out what you need. And I know it sucks that you have to make that first step, and that first step can be really hard. But once you do that, I hope that you will find the support you need, and someone else will make that work easier for you and help you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to completely echo that this is very valuable advice, and which is something I got early on in my career as well. And I just want to also mention to all of you that the participant who asked the question wanted to express their gratitude for these answers. So thank you. Let me go to another question. So you've indicated that about half the people with physics PhDs get industry jobs, but also that there are only about 250 tenure track jobs available for the 1,600 that get a physics PhD each year. This seems to leave out quite a few people. What happens to the people not counted among these groups?
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So those 250 or 300 faculty jobs, those are, I believe, tenure track at R1 institutions. So there might be non-tenure track, there might be lectureships, there might be, so non-tenure track, right? Like lectureships and non-tenure tracks at universities, and other positions at four-year colleges, so liberal arts schools, which have a larger teaching component, as Sarah mentioned. And then I believe there's national labs that are in the public sector and not the private sector, and then also government jobs. And then, of course, high school teaching. So there's so many things you can do with your physics degree, and those are just a few examples.
Okay. Okay, another, I think, very important question in the current environment. Let me just find it. Sorry, I lost it. Here we go. Okay, my question is about the statistics of the academic job market. In particular, how did the current pandemic affect the academic job market recently? And how will it affect the academic job market in the near future? What do you anticipate? It's a tough one.
I think Midhat might have some more statistics. Do you want to take this one, Midhat?
So I can't make any predictions myself, but Julia showed this slide that actually that plot is from the APS job board. So APS has a job board, but we actually don't just get listings from people posting to the APS job board, but we also get listings from like IEEE Computing. It's like a combined job board. So we get listings from a bunch of different societies that we partner with. And we just compared data for, I believe 2019 and 2020, to look at, sort of get an idea of what's happening with the job market in COVID, after COVID. And yeah, what we saw is, while there wasn't a huge decrease in the number of jobs in academia, what we did see is there were more temporary positions and fewer permanent positions that were being posted. And I've also read in different places that a lot of physics departments are losing funding, and they're having trouble getting, even staying alive as a department. So I would say academia might not look so great as a prospect, but that's just a personal opinion from what I've read, and I really can't predict the future. But what I would say is, before you thinking about COVID and what that impact that has on the economy is a good and practical thing to do. But more important really are your values. So think about what you want in your career. And I don't just mean, oh, I really like how my professor's life looks, so that's what I want to do. Talk to people in industry, talk to people in academia, talk to them about their day-to-day lives, look up stats on salaries, think about, whether or not you want to be able to pick where you live. That might be easier to do in an industry job than a faculty job. So think about all of those things, as well as looking at the impact of COVID, which is a little bit unpredictable.
Yes, I just wanted to articulate a couple extra points. I'm going to try to stay away from the anecdotal sorts of things that I've just heard, myself looking for jobs or hearing from people that are looking for jobs, and going up through different levels. So at the graduate school level, of people leaving undergrad and applying to graduate school, there's been a massive uptick in applications. I guess I'm specifically talking about maybe in a couple separate institutions. I mean, I know certainly at Columbia, because a lot of the requirements for standardized testing were waived. So that's unclear whether that will come back. I think at a lot of these places, some institutions that got rid of the physics GRE have committed to never looking at the physics GRE again. Some institutions are saying, okay, we got rid of it for this 1 year because nobody could get to a standardized testing site, so maybe we'll put it back into play. But that's just something to take into consideration of how the market is looking. I mean, I know that it means the acceptance rates for a lot of institutions have gone down quite a bit because more and more people are applying to certain types of schools since those requirements are not available. And then at the postdoc level, at the faculty level, I mean, I know a lot of institutions still have hiring freezes in place. I know a lot of them went into play in mid-2019, and some of them have removed those hiring freezes, and some of them have not. But it's also worth remembering that at least at the postdoc level or at the graduate school level, a lot of those positions are funded by DOE or NSF grants, and that those grants are on a several-year turnover cycle, so that it may take a little bit of a delay to see the impact of something like this. I mean, if your institution just started a 3-year DOE cycle, they have 3 years of funding that's booked for that group, and they have accounted for 2 postdoc positions to be in play for those 3 years. So that funding is likely to be unmodified as it comes to the COVID situation. So of course, every fiscal year, the appropriations will change, and that means the amount of money that goes to each of those DOE and NSF will change, but that you have a bit more insulation maybe, and it may be a little tough to see straight away. Those are just a couple of things, yeah, that come to mind as factors in the whole thing.
Okay, great. Okay, is there known information or data on the percentage of PhDs that go into industry that undergo further formal education or training, for example, coding camp or low-paying internships first, in order to get a good position in the private sector after earning their PhD?
I don't have any stats on that, but I will say I know lots of people that straight out of their PhD, they were making 120, 130K without any other training.
Okay. Okay, here's an interesting question. What if you are tenure track already and want to change subfields? Any advice on that?
I think that's a little bit trickier. But I think, if you can find the funding and the grants to do the research that you want to do, you can start to transition into that. That's all I can think of. I don't have as much experience in this area. I don't know if others want to weigh in as well.
Keith, do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe somebody who's already kind of tenured should answer that, because those are the people who are going to judge a tenure track person. When somebody's hired into a tenure track position, they're usually hired into a group. You know, you're going to be a high energy theorist. You're going to contribute to our high energy theory effort. And then if you want to switch into some other field, even if you could successfully do that with no track record at all, which can be kind of hard to do. It's hard to get grant money as it is. It might not be something that the department's goals were revolving around. So the first thing I would ask is whether or not my department was willing to have somebody shift from area to area, to see first if that was an open pathway within the big department plan. And if it's outside the department, then probably tenure is with a department, not a university usually. So then it would be something you'd functionally be giving up your position in that department. Not to say that careers can't change even after you're in a tenure track position, but when you do that, there are certain investments that have been made in you in terms of startup and the position itself. And so that's something to try to plan with I would talk to the department head or your chair, if that's something you even want to reveal at this stage, because it can be a tricky subject.
I think, I mean, I don't know, this is just a guess. So because I don't have any experience in that either, but I think it's probably also important to, if one seriously wants to pursue that option, to establish, you know, connections with the new subfield somewhat in advance in order to show, okay, you know, this is not just a pipe dream, but, you know, you have connections already, you have built up a bit of an idea what are interesting research questions in that field and so on and so forth, right? Then people will take you more seriously, like the department head, for instance, or something like that. Because they obviously, in addition to what Keith already said, you know, about resources being aligned with certain research fields, they definitely will not be happy to hear about that if they feel that the danger of you as a faculty member to somehow not succeed in a new field is somehow increased, right? So they definitely need to get a sense that if you make that switch, you will succeed.
Okay, let me go to another question. This one may be somewhat specific, but I'm nervous about how theoretical particle physics can set me up for an industry job. I mostly hear about experimentalists going into industry. Does anyone want to try that one?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So I have a lot of theorist friends. Some of them went into the finance sector, and some of them went into different types of data science careers. So there's a lot of insurance companies hire people to do modeling. And I know from one person I specifically heard that it was eerie, her word, not mine, how similar the data modeling she was doing in her particle physics work was to the work she does at the company that she is at. So yeah, finance, industry, and all kinds of data science. You really have to, when you're applying to these jobs, what you should do is you play up your problem solving skills, your modeling skills, your all of those technical skills. Really think about the skills. When you're applying to industry jobs, you are not a particle physicist. You're not a high energy theorist. Don't label yourself as the subfield that you're a part of that we're used to doing in academia, but instead you really market your skills, because that is what employers look for.
Okay, great. Maybe we have time for one more question. So I think maybe this refers to Sarah's talk, but it was mentioned that you should, if you're applying for a position, you should talk to people at those institutions. What if you personally don't know anyone? Should you reach out to the chair or other members of the group or offer to give a talk? Is that acceptable? And in practice, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways. If you know someone who might know someone at that institution, you can talk to them and ask for an introduction. You can also, find someone, say there's someone in your research area who you don't really know, but that you want to talk to, it's fine to just cold email and say like, hey, I saw there was a posting. I'm interested in applying to this. Would you have some time to talk about it? I definitely did that. I emailed strangers at institutions and they were very nice. They took some time to talk to me and it was really helpful. So just try and find, some faculty or, maybe even the chair. The chairs are usually pretty busy, but if you find a faculty member who's kind of in a similar area, you might be able to get some additional information too about the dynamics of the department as well. But if you can get some time with the chair too, that's also very helpful because they have a really good vision of like what the plan for the next kind of 5-year plan for the department is.
Can I just add to that? So those informational interviews that Julia mentioned, those are really, really helpful because in that you can even say, I'm just looking to learn about your career path. And you don't have to say, hey, give me a job. You can say, I'm looking around and I'm just trying to learn about different departments. And that way it kind of takes the stress off of the other person that you're not asking them to hire you because they might not have funding. And that would help them be more willing to talk to you because they're like, oh, you just want to know about my career path in our department. I'm happy to do that. Same for industry, don't just go asking for a job, just ask people. People love talking about themselves. So just, I want to hear about your career path. Oh, sure. Let me talk to you for 20 minutes.
And if it's, with a specific job posting in academia that you want specific information on, you kind of do have to mention that. But yeah, like Midhat's saying, if you just want to get a feel for things, like definitely feel free to email people like that. All
right. Well, let me thank Julia, Sarah, and Midhat again. This was extremely useful. I actually learned a lot. And let me thank all of the participants as well for all the great questions. If I didn't get to your question, I'm really sorry. We just had so many, we ran out of time. But hopefully everyone found this to be useful. This session has been recorded and we plan to post it, so it would be a resource for you in the future. Let me also just remind you that the parallel sessions will start at 2:15 p.m., so a little bit more than 10 minutes. So just be aware of that. Again, you can access the parallel sessions from the usual Zoom schedule with all of the links. With that, we'll conclude the session, and thanks again to the speakers as well as all of the participants.